Hey guys, it's Shaylin and I'm here today with another writing video. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about rejection and dealing with rejection as a writer. It's part of being a writer. Assuming that you're submitting your work, you're gonna get rejected. Rejection is kind of inescapable as a writer. My experience with rejection comes from submitting stories to literary magazines and contests, but this kind of applies across the board. Querying agents, going on submission to publishers. Rejection is going to be part of your life as a writer. It's kind of inescapable, and so it's kind of important that you learn how to manage it, because if you don't really know how to manage it, it will hold you back. Rejection is what's holding you back from submitting. You're essentially just self-rejecting the work, right? If you're like, well, I'm not going to submit to that because I might get rejected, whether you submit and get rejected or don't submit at all, it's really the same outcome, which is you don't win that prize, you don't get selected for that opportunity, you don't get that acceptance. At least if you submit, there's the chance that you will get accepted, right? So in a way, not submitting and getting rejected are kind of, it's the same outcome in the end, which leads me to my first point, which is just remember that literally every writer gets rejected. I get rejected, you get rejected, we all get rejected. Think of any writer that you admire, they've been rejected. We're all over here getting rejected, and it's just a matter of how you are able to deal with it. And if you manage it well, it doesn't have to be a hindrance. My second tip is submit your best work. Really polish it to be as good as you can make it so that when you submit something, like, you really couldn't be more proud. Then when they reject you, you'll kind of have that peace of mind that it just wasn't what they were looking for. You did the absolute best you could. If you submit something and when you submit, you know you could maybe do a little more work on it, then when you get rejected, you're gonna have this nagging feeling that's like, if I had just done that extra bit of work, maybe they would have taken it, you know? I've had that feeling so many times where I've submitted work that was mostly done. It was 95% done, but I was just too lazy to polish out the final 5%, you know? Maybe I just rushed it because I just wanted to get it over with. Then when the rejections come in, I'm just like, you know, it's probably not the final 5% that was the deciding factor, but what if it was? As long as you did the best that you can, and you know that you submitted work that you're like 100% proud of and you can 100% stand behind, then when they reject you, it's like, okay, it's not because I didn't do a good enough job. It's because what you were looking for just wasn't this. I just wasn't what you wanted, and that's okay. And so I think if you can submit work that you're super proud of, you've really put everything into, and you know that it's like 100% there, you can kind of have that confidence and be like, you know what? It's not me, it's them. I did everything that I could to get this opportunity. I didn't in the end, but it's not to fault of my own. I just wasn't what they were looking for, and you can't predict that. Tip number 3 is to look into the future. Have a backup plan, right? If you're submitting to something, kind of start thinking in your mind, okay, where am I going to submit this when I get rejected? Because then when that rejection comes in, it won't feel like the end of the road. It'll actually be the start of a new opportunity. Let's say you submit to a contest, and while the piece is out at the contest, start thinking in your mind, okay, when the rejections come in for this contest, where am I going to submit the piece? It'll be a happy surprise if they accept you, but if they don't, if they reject you, then you can be like, okay, great, they rejected me, now I can go submit to these things. So if you kind of frame it that way, where you're always looking towards the next thing that you want to submit the piece to, then when you get the rejection in, it's actually like an opportunity. Personally, I love submitting. Like, clicking submit on Submittable is really the source of most of my serotonin. And it just helps a rejection not feel like the end of the road or the end of the line. Which leads to my next point, which is try not to have a single dream agent, dream magazine, etc., etc. I mean, obviously, it's okay to have dreams, you know, it's okay to have these things, but if while you're writing something, you're like, I want this story to be published in this one magazine, the odds of landing that one opportunity are pretty slim. You know, this happened to me with a story where I wrote a story and I really thought that it was perfect for this one magazine. And the story was a little more niche than most of my stuff, so I knew that I didn't have too many options, and then they rejected it. You know, and that whole writing, submitting, publishing process takes months, right? That was probably around 7 or 8 months of time where I was just set on this one magazine publishing me, and then they didn't publish me. And I didn't know what else to do. I was like, this is the end of the line with this story, like where else will I submit it? I hadn't thought beyond this one magazine, and so it felt like there was no more future for the story. Obviously it's okay to have dream magazines. I have dream magazines that like I would love to be in. In fact, there are magazines that I considered my dream magazines that I've been published in just through sheer perseverance. And there are other magazines that I've been submitting to for years, and it's like my dream to be published by them. If for each single piece that you write, there's just one thing that you feel like your world will not be complete until the piece is accepted by this thing, the odds are it won't be accepted by this thing. Unfortunately. Maybe it will be, which is great, but you have to think beyond just one opportunity. And so that's why I do advise against having like a single dream magazine or a single dream agent. It's not really how it works. I think this is something that you see a lot in movies where like the writer is like getting ready to submit their story for this one contest and they submit to the one contest. That's not how submitting your work works. You don't just polish a piece for one opportunity, submit it, and then that's the end. You have to submit to many, many places usually before your piece will find its home. That's normal and it's okay, but it's why I would advise against setting your sights on this just one thing. This is also why I advise against writing stories for a magazine. Like, let's say there's a magazine you really want to be published in, and so you're like, okay, I'm gonna write a story based on exactly what I think they would want. What happens when they reject you, right? You really can never predict what magazines will want. Like I was talking about with that story that got rejected, I thought it was perfect for this magazine. So when they rejected it, it was one of the most like stinging rejections I've ever gotten. Normally I just brush rejection off, I don't really care. But that one really did sting, and it's because in my mind, it was like the perfect magazine for the story. I had invested a little too much in that one submission when normally you can't put all your eggs in one basket with submission. Tip number 5, know that acceptance and rejection is not a good-bad binary. I think this is where a lot of people get quite tripped up. They submit their work for the first time and then they get rejected. And to them that reads as, this story is bad. That's really not how it works. It's not like when you submit a story to a magazine or a novel to an agent or whatever. Like the editor gets all these submissions and they accept every single one that is good and they decline every single one that is bad. They can reject a piece that they think is good. Magazines will reject pieces that they love. There are plenty of excellent pieces, and editors and magazines and agents, etc. know that these are good pieces, and they're still rejecting them. Because first of all, they're just getting way more submissions than they can reasonably accept or take on, or it's just not right for them. Or maybe it is a good piece, but they didn't personally love it. It just didn't click with them. If you can talk to people who've worked in magazines, people who've read for magazines or who've edited magazines, they can give you a lot of perspective. If you don't know anyone personally, like look up interviews with magazine editors or podcasts or anything. It'll really give you some perspective on what actually goes into these decisions, because it is so much more than just, is this good or bad? Did we like it or didn't like it? It's unpredictable and it's complicated. Rejection is not just a good bad binary, and I think that one of the reasons why people take rejection too personally is because they see it as a good bad binary, and it's really not at all. Which leads to my 6th tip, which is don't layer extra meaning onto rejections. I see people do this a lot, and I think it's really going to make rejection a lot harder, is when you get a rejection and you layer on extra meaning. For example, thinking that it's personal, saying things like, oh, this magazine just hates me. I've even seen people say things like, when someone rejects you, they now have ownership of the work. When someone rejects you, they don't take any power from you. They don't take any value from you or your work. I can promise you it's not personal, because they don't know you. They don't know you. So I can promise it's not personal. It also means nothing for the future of the piece. It's not a testament to your skill. It's not a testament to the skill or the quality of the piece. It's really not anything. All a rejection means is, we decided not to accept this. The thing is, you may never know the reasons. But I think a lot of people assume the worst, and they layer on all these extra negative layers onto a rejection and interpret a rejection as meaning XYZ when all it means is, we did not accept this piece. So kind of just take it at face value. And I think that learning to just see rejection as almost this like matter-of-fact thing, it's very unemotional, it's very impersonal, can kind of help. I also think it's good to remember that literally so much of it is luck. Like I was saying earlier, it's not a good-bad binary. It's not like magazines are out there publishing every single piece they find good and declining every single piece they find bad. Your piece has to land in front of the right reader and then the right editor. at the right time. It has to be for the right issue, at the right magazine. You'll hear a lot of stories about times where pieces are declined just because there's already a piece that's too similar in the issue. Although it's kind of funny, I have a piece forthcoming in Prism International. A friend of mine is also being published in the same issue. In university, one of our professors would always say that we have the same brain just because we had this history of writing weirdly similar things. We would approach things in the same very weirdly specific way. We got the proofs, the digital proofs for the issue, and I read her piece. And it was like the same piece as my piece, and we had not read each other's pieces, we hadn't discussed them, we hadn't conferred with each other at all. And I thought it kind of funny just because normally you'll hear it said that like magazines won't accept two really similar pieces, and our pieces have so many weird similarities. But you know, like it does happen, you know, like let's say that a magazine has already accepted a story about a baking competition, and then they get another story also about a baking competition, and they're like, well, we've already accepted a baking competition story, and it would just be super weird for us to have two baking competition stories. Stuff like that can happen. It's why I've heard it said that it can be to your advantage to submit as early in a submission period as possible. It will lower the risk of your piece being declined because there's one that's too similar. Because yours will be the first piece. Then it's the other person who submits something similar that gets declined. Just a little tip for you. Kind of to illustrate the luck, so I was talking to a friend of mine who used to be a first reader for a pretty high-profile magazine, and she was explaining how the reading works for their yearly contest. Each reader would get a batch of poems, and they could each send one poem, the best from that batch, to the next round. Let's say she gets a batch of poems, and there are 4 that are super strong. They're all worthy of going to the next round. She still has to now pick one. But then another reader, let's say, gets a batch where there aren't really any that are honestly that stand out. One piece from this kind of weak batch is going to get sent forward, and 3 really strong pieces from this other batch are going to get left behind. Luck of the draw, you know? The fact that there's a lot of luck involved doesn't take away from the accomplishment of getting published. It doesn't mean that you only got published or accepted by luck, because you didn't. You also need a good story to back up the luck, but luck can be a factor in preventing a good piece from getting accepted. You know, you're never getting published just on luck, but you can get declined just on luck. Number 8, this is kind of just a quick thing, but especially if you're new, you can submit to kind of lower stakes opportunities so that you can remind yourself that you literally have nothing to lose. And the biggest example of this I can think of is things with no fees. Nothing stings like a rejection from a contest with a high submission fee. It's one reason why I don't submit to contests that often, because I don't want to pay like $20 just to get rejected. That stings way more, because then it's like, now I'm out $20 and you rejected me. Most general submission periods, and certainly all queries, will be free. Then you literally have nothing to lose, and so if that's something that you find tends to sting a little, then just try to submit to those kind of lower stakes, and by that I mean free things. Tip number 9 is the tip that I attribute to my first publication, and it's to set a rejection goal. I sent my first ever story submission in, I think it was like April or May of 2017. I set a rejection goal to get 10 rejections. I can't remember if it was by the end. I think it was by the end of the year. Before I could even get those 10 rejections in, I'd gotten a piece published. I attribute that tip to why I got the piece published, because if I hadn't set that rejection goal, I think I would have just self-rejected. I would have been like, oh, there's no way I'd be published there, find reasons not to, put it off. But instead, I was just submitting my piece everywhere, all the time. I was actually kind of enjoying getting rejections, because my goal was to get 10 rejections. So every time I got a rejection, I was like, oh, one closer to my goal. So it kind of creates this like no worst case scenario. If you get rejected, that's now getting you towards your goal. Maybe you want to give yourself a reward if you get the 10 rejections by the end of the year. I don't know, whatever would work for you. If you're very reward motivated. I remember getting my first personalized rejection in there, and I was thrilled. And then before I could even hit 10, I got a story published. And I really do think it's because I had that goal of getting 10 rejections that I was submitting my piece so confidently and so much, and that's why I ended up getting a piece published. Number 10, remember that publishing opportunities are not a ranking game. I think this is a really easy, like, mental little trap to fall into. Where you are published is not a direct indicator of how good you are in relation to other writers. So it's not like if you get a piece published in this magazine, and then someone you know gets published in a much more high-profile, competitive magazine, they are a better writer than you. It doesn't work like that. You're both good writers. It's very easy to feel that way, like, oh, that person got published in that magazine, or they won that contest that I really wanted to win, and it's very easy to then go, okay, then I'm not as good at that as that person, because if I was as good as them, I would have won that contest, or I would have been in that magazine. But it's not like that. The thing is, with this mindset, you will never feel pleased with your accomplishments. There will always be something bigger or better that someone else has done that you haven't done yet, that you feel like you need to accomplish or outdo in order to be validated. It's never gonna end, because I can tell you that when I got my first story published, I was like, maybe it's just a fluke, just one story published means nothing, and I felt like I needed, maybe 5 publications, let's say, to be like a real valid writer. And then when I got 5 publications, I was like, oh, but there are other people who have like 10 or 20. It never ends, right? Eventually, it's gonna be like, okay, but that person has a book deal and I don't have a book deal. Then it's gonna be, okay, but that person has a better book deal than me. And then it's gonna be, okay, but that person won a man booker. Like, there's always gonna be someone else that you can compare yourself to and feel like they are a better writer than you because they've done XYZ thing that you haven't done yet. Anytime you progress, you'll just feel like now there's a higher bar you need to reach, and you'll never feel proud of yourself. Where you were published doesn't contribute to any kind of ranking of how good you are. And even though there may be certain things you accomplish that feel like bigger accomplishments for you, it doesn't mean that you are not as good or not as accomplished as someone who has done other things. Tip number 11 is honestly just like be analytical. Use rejection trends as a learning opportunity. If a piece is getting rejected a ton, maybe it's because you're not submitting to the right outlets for the piece. Even though I wouldn't interpret one rejection as really meaning anything more than just a rejection, you can learn from the trends. If a piece is getting rejected over and over, maybe you want to take another look at it. Maybe there's some personalized feedback in some of these rejections you can learn from. Maybe you want to get someone to take a look at it. Maybe you need to look for other outlets for the piece. Maybe you're not submitting to the right type of magazine. I wouldn't read too much into a single rejection, but you definitely can learn from the trends in order to just become more submission savvy. And finally, you don't have to accept the narrative that rejection will hurt. I think it's parroted a lot. Oh, rejection hurts, rejection sucks, rejection is painful, rejection is brutal, and it makes you feel like rejection is meant to hurt. If you're told throughout your whole coming of age as a writer that when you eventually start submitting and the work gets rejected, that's going to be painful, it's going to be brutal, then it's going to be painful, it's going to feel brutal. That narrative doesn't have to be true. I don't think we have to accept that as fact. Rejection really doesn't have to be painful. It doesn't have to hurt your feelings in any way. And I'm not saying that your feelings aren't valid if you find yourself hurt or dejected by rejection, because that narrative that rejection is hurts can really get to you and affect how you see rejection. Just because that's the common narrative about rejection doesn't mean it's true. It's actually completely untrue. Because rejection is not a thing that is done with malice at all, and it can just be something that feels neutral to you or even motivates you. Part of what will help you get used to rejection is literally just getting used to it. You kind of have to just expose yourself to rejection to learn how to handle it. If you're holding yourself back from submitting out of the fear of getting rejected, you're just building up that inevitable rejection to be so much worse than it is. So just submit the thing, click submit. The first rejection might hurt, but as you get used to it and you are more exposed to rejection, you can see it a lot more objectively. You can kind of just get used to it and learn to just brush it off. So that's all for this video on rejection and dealing with rejection. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, you can always send me an ask on Tumblr, and I'll see you in another video. Bye.